2017, paper 1, question 1. So this question was a functions question. And the first thing we're given here is a quadratic equation where we have to write it in the vertex form, or in other words, the perfect square form. So this format here is our vertex form. Now normally when we're doing it in the vertex form, we normally see the formula is written as y is equal to a times x minus h squared plus k. So that's just something to be mindful of. That's the way we've been writing it out in our textbooks, which was page 140. So that will be important when it comes to the question part B. So first of all, how do we write it in perfect square form? So the first thing we have to do is, when we're doing it in the perfect square form, we always have to check that the coefficient of x squared is 1. And in this case, it's actually not, it's 2. So our first step is to take out 2 as being common. And that leaves us then with x squared minus 7 over 2x minus 5. So not the nicest of perfect square questions, because obviously you can see straight away we're going to have a fraction in our answer. So what we then do is we take the coefficient of x and we half it, and then we square it. So in other words, we have minus 7 over 2, we have to half that and then square it. So in other words, we're going to have minus 7 over 4 to be squared, which gives us 49 over 16. So what we then do is we're going to take that number and we're going to put it back into this equation. But of course I can't just put something into an equation because that would change the value. So I have to add and subtract this number. So it's going to be plus 49 over 16 minus 49 over 16 minus 5. So we basically inserted between the x and the 5. And of course, this overall is 0, so I haven't changed the value of the quadratic. So what we then want to do is we're going to put brackets around the first part, which is going to become our perfect square. So in other words, we'll have x squared minus 7 over 2x plus 49 over 16. And then if I have minus 49 over 16 minus 5, well, that gives me minus 129 over 16. Now, if I'm looking at the perfect square then, I have to say, well, what's going to add to give me 7 over 2, multiply to give me 49 over 16, and of course it's 7 over 4. So therefore that becomes 2 times x minus 7 over 4 to be squared, minus 129 over 16. Now, a lot of you kind of leave the answer like this, but we have to go back to the format that they wanted in. And if you look, the format that they wanted in is a number in front of x plus h to be squared, plus a number on its own. So a is not outside that bracket there. A is only times the x plus h to be squared. So that means I now have to take my 2 and I have to multiply it out. So that's 2 times x minus 7 over 4 to be squared, minus 2 times 129 over 16, which is 129 over 8. And therefore, if I'm looking at the answer, A is 2, H is minus 7 over 4, and K is minus 129 over 8. So there was 5 marks going for that question, and it was broken down into 4 parts. It was a D question. So it was 0, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So in B then, so for B we have, hence write the minimum point of F. So the minimum point, if I go back to this equation, when it's in the form of y equals a times x minus h squared plus k, then our minimum is our hk value here. But of course, we have written it in the form of plus hk, which is our minimum. So therefore it has to be minus the h value. So it has to be minus hk. So therefore that's going to be 7 over 4 sorry. So it's going to be 7 over 4, and the k value was minus 129 over 8. And that's 10 marks going for that. So it's either right or partially right, or it's wrong. So in other words, if you get one of the coordinates right, you take off from 4, both right, and you get 10. So we then have to explain, well, why must f have 2 real roots? So to have 2 real roots, we look at the equation under the square root sign in our minus b formula. In other words, b squared minus 4ac. So if we have 2 real roots, that means that they are distinct, and therefore that means that that value has to be greater than 0. And again, we have to know that off by heart. That's our discriminant. So if I look at the quadratic, it was 2x squared minus 7x minus 10. And therefore that means that a is 2, b is minus 7, and c is 10. So if I'm looking at b squared minus 4ac, well, that's minus 7 squared minus 4 times a times c. So that means that the value b squared minus 4ac is equal to 49 plus 80. That should be a minus 10 there, sorry. So it's minus 10. Therefore, that's minus 10. So we end up with 49 plus 80, which gives us a value of 129. So basically what that means is that the value b squared minus 4ac is a positive number greater than 0. And if it's a positive number greater than 0, then that verifies that we must have 2 real distinct roots. In other words, cuts the x-axis at 2 different places. So there was 5 marks going for that. And again, it was either 0, 3, or 5. So part 2 then says we want to find the roots. And again, we have to be careful because it says find the roots in the form of p plus root q. And we're told that p and q are elements of the rational numbers. In other words, they're going to be fractions. So if we go back to what the quadratic was there a second ago, I had written down 2x squared minus 7x minus 10. And we'd written down that a was 2, b was minus 7, and c was minus 10. Now, you can do this one of 2 ways. You can use your minus b formula, or you can go back to a, where you've written it in the perfect square formula, and of course, let that equal to 0 and get it on its own. So it's, much of a muchness. So if we go with the minus b formula, then you have x is equal to minus b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Now we've already established what the square root of b squared minus 4ac is. It's 129. So therefore we have minus b, so that's minus 7, plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, we said was 129, all over 2 times a, which is 4. So that gives us 7 plus or minus the square root of 129 over 4. Now, of course, we have to write this in the form of p plus or minus root q. So that means I have to be able to write that as 2 separate values. 7 over 4 plus or minus the square root of 129 over 4. Now, however, that's not root q there. That's root q over another number. So I have to write the square root of 129 over 4 as 1 square root. And of course, the square root that gives me 4 must be 16. So in other words, that can be written as 129 over 16, because the square root of 129 over the square root of 16 is, of course, the square root of 129 over 4. So now we can see that p is 7 over 4. And q is 129 over 16, both fractions, as we were told. And there was 5 marks going for that, and it was broken down into 3 parts, so 3, 4, or 5. So if you don't have it in the correct format there at the end, you're going to lose your mark.